This is Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne, the podcast where successful people share what they do to thrive under pressure.
Hopefulness is about the fact that actually when things are really hard, when the world is shifting around, when change is happening rapidly, that gives room to create new things. And so hopefulness is a kind of a faith moving into that space that you're showing up with your values and doing the best that you can. And I think that's really exciting. I don't think it means that you're pretending that things are okay all the time.
Today, I'm speaking to Clare Reddington, someone who I discovered in this conversation who holds a deep, steady belief in remaining hopeful, even in a world that feels increasingly pressured and uncertain. Clare left university with a degree in drama, media and cultural studies, and in true Clare fashion, didn't pick just one direction, she went all in on all three. After time at the Cheltenham Arts Festival, she returned home to Bristol and stepped into Watershed, which many of you will know as a creative powerhouse. For over 40 years, Watershed has been a place of innovation, risk-taking and cross-art form brilliance. It's internationally recognised for its work in film, in culture, art, technology and talent development. Clare has spent more than 20 years inside that ecosystem, and for the last 7, she's led it as CEO. And what grounds her leadership, I discovered, is an utter commitment to values-led, hopeful, collaborative ways of working, and a real dedication to climate justice and the power of bringing people together. And I love this for today's conversation because in the last episode, we explored what it means to perform under pressure with a doctor who supports world-class athletes. And this time, we're shifting the lens a bit from the high-performance world of elite sport to the demanding world of evolving a non-profit cultural organisation. Clare pours her energy into creating spaces for creativity, for community, for possibility. And there's so much in her leadership approach that I think we can all learn from. Clare, it is fantastic to have you on Better Under Pressure, and I really can't wait to understand what this whole word means coming from your world.
Yeah, it's like I'm nervous. I'm nervous and excited about spending some time under pressure.
Excellent. So maybe we could start, Clare, with the sort of business, the leadership role that you've had for quite a long time now with Watershed. Actually, I have to say that I've been stalking you a bit, and I looked at that speech that you did for your doctorate, and there is something that those 4 things that you put in as being key. I think all sorts of. I mean, we could dig into all 4 of those and go under the surface and talk about pressure. But let's just start first of all with how do you experience pressure?
So let's start by saying I think I've got the best job. Like, I run a cultural organisation in Bristol, which is an amazing city. Watershed was the first media centre in the UK. And I used to bunk off school to come here. So I care about it really deeply. It sort of feels like it's in my bones. I'm Bristolian, so I really care about its role in the city. And that means I feel a sort of deep connection to it. And lots of people say to me, like, when are you going to go and get a new job? When are you get like what they imply is a sort of patriarchal sense of career development. Like, you've been running Watershed for ages. Why aren't you running the Barbican or the South Bank now? But actually, I think that the time that I've spent here and the sort of depth of my care for it has allowed me to hold and carry it through change, and allows me, I guess, to think about what it could be in the future. And so pressure is showing up for us at the moment really significantly in that the cultural sector is under a lot of challenge. Inflation is outpacing our ability to earn money, and we're trying to hold a space, to be true to our values, to keep showing up for people and communities, whilst also wondering how on earth will we pay the bills in 3 years' time. But actually, that sort of deep sense of stewardship that I have for this organisation enables me, I think, on most days, to navigate that.
I love that. I love particularly that bit around stewardship. That interests me a lot because I think it taps in. I remember speaking to Annabelle Holt, who's the CEO of Which, and she used the phrase, I feel like I'm a guardian of this national treasure.
Yeah.
And and we had a whole discussion about how that helps her rise above some of the things that maybe sit within the uncertainty of running a business like that. And I'm reminded of that as I listen to you, actually, Claire, that whole idea of stewardship and the fact that it has a sort of golden thread from you at school all the way through it, and how meaningful that becomes. I mean, in my world, that's called like the purpose energy. It's an energy that actually almost raises you above anything. And I'm wondering how do you, in terms of your own personal leadership, do you tap into that in any consistent or conscious way, or is it just a vein?
I think a sense of the value and the sense of being good at change is a conscious force within our work. So we know that Watershed has consistently evolved. We're not a cultural organisation that would like to preserve ourselves in aspect. We're not here to we're not a preservation space. So we're a media centre. Media is plastic. It changes, it evolves. And the most important thing, I think, for us in terms of being publicly funded is being relevant. And so actually what shows up for me is that sense of we're good at change. We've done this before. We know how to course correct and evolve and to stay relevant. And in general, I have a good sense that that will see us through.
Yeah. And is that something? I mean, that's almost like a mantra. You know, we're good at change. We've done it before. La, 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 la. I mean, do you consciously have that within your whole? I mean, oh, there's so many questions I want to ask you, Claire. But particularly about this like value-led. What I'm getting already from this conversation is it is motivated by some real ownership and sharing sense of a value that matters, I imagine, to most of the people that are working in Watershed. So that idea of we're good at change, we're staying relevant, and as a consequence, you're constantly evolving. And it sounds like your relationship with evolution, with change, is really healthy and exciting and artistic.
Absolutely. I mean, I came into Watershed to set up the creative technology part of the business. So it existed as a media center, but really what that meant was cultural cinema. And so I came in and set up something called the Pervasive Media Studio, which is a free to access space for creatives, technologists, engineers, academics who are all thinking about the future. And that notion of orienting yourself to a future and a better future than the one that we've got now. So thinking really clearly about what impact the actions you take today will have on tomorrow is the way I entered Watershed. And the Pervasive Media Studio gifts space to people. And the contract that we have, so we have a community of about 250 artists and creatives and small businesses. And the contract that we take is one of openness and generosity. So we literally require them to sign that they'll be open with their ideas. That doesn't mean giving away your IP. It means being open with your learning. And being generous with your time, because we're gifting a load of things. And so we're asking you to gift back to the community, to look after people. And so I guess those two sort of pillars of openness and generosity, and that sense of being situated within an ecology of practice, means that actually pressure feels shared. It feels like a solidarity space. It feels like as long as you're being open about it, and that includes with staff, as well as our creative community, then there is a way of negotiating it. It doesn't mean that it isn't hard, and it doesn't mean that, like every other leader, I struggle with like savior complexes and well, what I have to fix and what my responsibilities are. But I think if we keep coming back to that sense of we are a player within an ecology, and for that ecology to thrive, we need to be abundant, open, generous, rather than defensive and collecting and sort of amassing of wealth. Then generally we don't go that wrong.
Yeah. So I'm being drawn in this question to like, and this is because I'm so practical, it's what, and also I like to pass stuff forward, you know,
Yeah.
like what is the practice of that for you, Claire? Like, so I'm hearing there's a practice obviously for you as an individual, which has held you tight to Watershed for a long, long time. There's a practice with your staff who's running this, what sounds like fabulous institution. And then there's the community that comes and uses it with openness and
Yeah.
generosity. So how do you, as the, I want to say the pinnacle of this organization, but I know you won't want that because it's much more collaborative than that. But you know, how do you hold all of that, and what's the practice of it?
So I guess the practice is like, how are we not extractive of the ecology that we're working in? So that involves thinking really clearly about well-being. It involves really progressive policies around well-being. So, for instance, if you come from a community or a lived experience that isn't like the majority of cultural workers, so that, you know, the majority of cultural workers are middle-class white people.
Yeah.
And so if you're working with us as either an artist or a staff member, you can have access to rest days, paid rest days, which are about the added burden that you have of bringing your lived experience to work, and also the added burden you might feel because the world is pretty hard to navigate. And so it's really about thinking what are the progressive ways we can support people. We also do something every year called balance and belonging. So for a thriving ecology to exist, it needs to be balanced. There needs to be not, you know, you need in a natural ecology, you'd think you don't want too many apex predators. You also want insects and bees and all these things. And we come from a world of there's an academic called John C.D. Brown who works for Harvard, who a very long time ago was looking at Xerox Park, so looking at those startup worlds, and he said, to really deliver innovation in the marketplace, you need to work with people who are not like you. And so if you're working with people who are not like you, so that might be in sectoral experience, it might be age or lived experience, you need to be very conscious about the different ways that people will experience the workplace. So for us, balance and belonging tracks the lived experience of our staff, or the backgrounds of our staff, their intersectional identities. So people aren't just white; they're also perhaps white and a carer, or disabled, or you know, working class. So we understand a bit about the backgrounds of the people who work for us, but really crucially, we understand how that impacts how they show up at work. So do all the young white women feel like they do the tidying up? Do Black disabled men feel like they have less of a voice in decision making? And so that helps us, I think, to provide a compass to the organization to say, okay, where do we need to do some work? Like what should we be thinking about? Where do we need to pay some attention? So this notion of a community of practice that is built on difference stays true, stays meaningful, and isn't extracting or exploiting people. And I think lots of companies that do work with communities could do with looking inside with that kind of depth of nuance and being like, what does it actually feel like though? And for us, that just pays huge dividends in terms of our workforce, in terms of who we work with, in terms actually of who turns up.
I can absolutely imagine. I'm fascinated to know how you track balance and belonging. Because, like, you know, most of the organizations we're working with have got engagement scores, or they do engagement profiles, or they do pulse surveys, etc. And I'm never really convinced how that turns up in any shift or change in culture. But you've ticked a box to say you've done it. Or, I mean, I'm being, you know, purposely specious right now. But how do you, from what you've just described, which feels much deeper than that, how do you track belonging and balance, like in the way that you've just described?
So we can see, for instance, I mean, I hate a pulse survey too. There's like deeply traumatic And you get like the moment in time in a pulse survey, and that could mean a million things and could be what's going on in the world.
Yes.
So for us, I guess if I'm thinking about openness, which is something that we think about a lot, the number of people who have moved from prefer not to say to being open about their lived experience and their identities in our survey is really substantial. And I think that shows a level
Mm.
of trust in an organization. And so what we've seen is a rise in the number of trans people who work for Watershed. Now, I don't think that is an actual rise. I just think people have become able to talk about their identity in the workplace in a different way. And I think that is a good sign
Mhm.
of openness and trust. For us, the most important thing about balance and belonging is getting that data back to the team leaders so the team
Yeah.
leaders can make change. That isn't about holding any of that stuff at an executive level, because nothing ever changes if you hold it at an executive level. You can like say, oh, I think this is working class people are going to be our priority for the next year, but actually you're not on the ground making the majority of the hiring decisions. And so for us, what's really changed is sort of giving staff the ability to understand, analyze, and act on their own data.
Yes. And I'm just now thinking about how this maps into I mean, it's almost like if you did a pressure survey, it feels like you are reducing the pressure for any individual working in that community by having systems like this that ask very honest questions and not just ask it, but act on it, it sounds like.
Hopefully, and then also by having things like rest days to back that up by saying there is pressure, and actually there
Mm.
is really specific pressure that some communities are feeling uh, beyond others. So the rise of the far right and sort of flags
Mm.
appearing on our streets does something to all of us, but
Mm.
actually it creates a fear for some communities that is very
Mm.
different to others. And so, really acknowledging that and creating ways to empower people to take the rest they need feels like that pressure relief, also.
Yeah. And do you feel people really honor that? Was it Netflix who did the you can have as much holiday as you like about 10 years ago and found out that actually the biggest thing was that people didn't that took less holiday than they
Yeah.
would have been allowed to have. So do you have a similar response? I mean, what how do people react to that openness?
People are really responsible with it. I think we see that they do take it. I mean, so when, for instance, we do quite a lot of events that also might like interact with people's lived experience. So we showed the film To Kill a War Machine, which is about the now proscribed Palestine Action group at Watershed. And whenever we show a film like that, we say, if this is going to interact in any way with your lived experience, you don't have to work it. Like you
Mm.
could
Mm.
talk to your line manager, we'll put you on a different shift, we'll find a different way of doing it. And actually, once you make an offer like that, people feel safe and they
Mm.
don't need to take it up.
Mm.
Because they know that you've thought about their experience and they know that you're not taking decisions at the top of an organization and not thinking about how they play out to the
Yeah.
people in the front facing roles. So I guess people don't take the piss, is my
Yeah. Yeah.
experience, and that there's a sort of sense of responsibility. Perhaps because those policies exist, they check in on their colleagues a bit more, and there's a sense of just being aware a bit more because it's an open conversation. I suspect most companies like those challenges are showing up, but they might be showing up in a non-honest way. So people might just be taking sick
Mm.
days
Mm.
because of the sort of general state of the poly crisis rather than being able to say what's really going on for them.
Yeah. Yeah. When I look at those four things you mentioned, I know it was a summary of your doctorate speech. The health of ecology. You mentioned it earlier. Don't extract more than you contribute. That I found that really interesting as to how do you monitor that, or how do you even notice that? I mean, I can see how you can control that, but that's one. And then the second one, understand yourself. And I'm seeing these all through the lens of pressure. How does that reduce pressure if you're extracting less than you contribute, that you understand yourself, that you understand your collaborators, and you celebrate the differences, and abundance mindset, and being hopeful. Like that's really like almost the other end of the scale of pressure. Like when people are under pressure, I find it's very hard for them, me included, to be hopeful. So how do any of those, do you think, map out against the map of pressure, Claire?
I really love Rebecca Solnit's work on hope, because when you say be hopeful, there's a sort of apple pie sense of like blind optimism that can come up for people. And actually what she talks about is in the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. And so being hopefulness is about the fact that actually when things are really hard, when the world is shifting around, when change is happening rapidly, that gives room to create new things. And so hopefulness is a kind of a faith moving into that space, that you're showing up with your values and doing the best that you can. And I think that's really exciting. I don't think it means that you're pretending that things are okay all the time. And I guess knowing yourself is part of that. I am just about to take a week off because I can sense that my resilience is low, and that my hope and judgment will be marred by that resilience. And I mean, that's sort of all my job is. In general, being the CEO, you sort of get the challenge. People bring you their challenges, and your job is is being able to exercise good judgment and being able to think about that sort of where is the uncertainty and what is the room to act that we have right now. And so I think knowing myself is that I'm taking a week off to sharpen myself up, to rest. Rest, and then I'll come back better and more able to do that. And so it doesn't involve pretending there is no pressure. But I think that's true as an organization as well, knowing what you're good at, knowing where you can make a difference. That notion of extractiveness is because I see lots of institutions and organizations sort of slapping logos on things in a like, oh yeah, we do this. Here's the DEI work we do, or here's the communities we look after. But actually they're not really meeting anyone on their terms. They're perhaps not in it for the long run. So there isn't a sense of sort of really sustained support. And they're not, just not really listening.
Gosh, so much in there. The importance of recovery is number one, that is really stripped through. So, people like blast through the first signs. So what I'm hearing is you're quite acutely aware of your first signs where, okay, I need a rest day, or I need 5 rest days. Before we discuss signs, I want to focus for a minute on hopefulness. Because hopefulness is something we really haven't talked about on this podcast. Well, certainly not hopefulness as a practice. And I'm really interested in that. Because when we're under pressure, when we're facing challenge or complexity, hopefulness can feel like it's the hardest thing to reach for. And partly because it could be perceived as naive, but mainly it just feels unavailable, which is why it's important to know how we can access it. What Clare brings into focus for me, especially through that Rebecca Solnit quote, is this beautiful reminder that uncertainty creates space to act. I just love that. And I love the word spaciousness anyway, and pairing it with uncertainty feels almost counterintuitive. Most of us associate uncertainty with constriction or with tightening, with our faster brain sensing danger and therefore staying hyper alert, which over time is very exhausting. But reframing it as spacious, as a place where we actually have room to move or to choose, to respond, that feels a lot more powerful and a lot more enjoyable. It's a reminder that within uncertainty, there's possibility. We can do something in that space. And the other thing I want to pick up on here, because it sits so beautifully with hopefulness, is something we have talked about a lot on this podcast, and that's recovery. It's much easier to be hopeful if we are well rested. It's an essential partner to performance, to achievement, to sustaining ourselves in a meaningful way. And what I love in Clare's approach is how she honours recovery, not just personally, but culturally. Those rest days are baked right into how Watershed operates. And she's so right, actually. Our judgment does get marred when we push on through. We either don't spot the early signs, or worse, we spot them and we then ignore them. I can do that, staying up late to get something finished, fully aware that it's taken me twice as long as it would if I simply went to bed and picked it up in the morning with a clearer brain. What's important to remember is that our bodies are actually very good at signalling what they need. The danger is when we don't act on those signals, because the body will simply turn up the volume and say, oh, you didn't notice that, I'll make it even louder. And if we override those physical signs again and again, we end up on a spiral that leads straight into ill health. In a moment, I'm going to ask Clare more about this, but I wanted to pause here because recovery and hopefulness are a strong partnership when it comes to managing pressure. And they're both practices. They're both choices that we can make. And they both create the spaciousness that we need to sharpen ourselves, to quote Clare, and to respond when we feel under pressure. What are your first signs, Clare?
For personally, it's the fight or flight. So if my fight or flight mechanism goes high quickly, if one thing comes in and I can feel my body become sort of agitated and engaged, then I know I need to take a bit of time to reset. In the last couple of years, for me, that's been nature, and I've spent loads of time sort of in nature, in wildness. I wild camp as much as I can. I spend time foraging, and in Dartmoor, where there's no mobile phone coverage, nature needs some really different things from you. Like it needs sort of your presence and your attention, and your understanding of it. And I find that very relaxing, which is great. But it's important. I also think it's as important as a leader to not cover that up and to say, I'm taking this time off because actually I'm finding it quite hard at the moment. I am a person, and it's important for all of us that we feel able to do that.
I'm glad. I was going to ask you that, whether you had been open in describing why you're taking a week off. And I think that's really powerful, Clare, when a leader says this is going on, and for many leaders, it feels very hard.
Yeah, I mean, especially I think I was in a conversation this morning about responsible business. What is a responsible business? And in a way, when you're attempting to steward a responsible business, you're bringing quite a lot of yourself into the picture in a different way. And so there's a kind of vulnerability, or what's the word? Like also perimenopause brain fog is showing up big stuff for me. But yeah, there's a vulnerability that hits differently, I think, because you've brought things that are important to yourself and your heart into the workplace, and that takes a different type of pressure. And so I think it is really important to speak about those things. I do, however, acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege. Like I'm also a CEO who can make a decision to take a week off to top my reserves back up. That although we do rest days, I don't imagine everyone feels like they have the agency and ability to take a week off for their mental health for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the shed method, there's 5 energies we talk about, and I always feel like shed down the body energy, physical recovery, and purpose energy are like the bookends. And when you're working in an organization like you're describing, and you're doing something that actually is a fundamental value of yours and has been all your life, purpose energy can extend beyond all rightness. Like it can take you through some extraordinary pressure, I think, purpose energy, in a way that is so exciting in a way to watch and witness and be part of. And then there's this moment in time where if you don't watch out like you've just watched out, it can then go into distress, or it can go into unhealthy behaviors and unhealthiness generally.
And I think that notion of losing yourself in the business. So I
Yes.
really noticed during COVID that I couldn't tell the difference between myself and Watershed at some point. And that's when those savior complexes come in. That's when you feel like you're the only person who can fix things, because you have taken all that purpose energy and you've poured it into a thing that you love and that needs it. But actually your boundary between yourself and your work has started to dissipate. And again, that's where nature has been really useful for me, is to sort of reconnect myself to feeling part of the natural world, not just part of a business world.
Yes. Yes. You're reminding me of another guest actually who goes and swims in the ponds at Hampstead every morning.
Yeah.
And he described it as, when you're in the water, you feel there's no difference between you and nature. You know, you are the water. You're not in the water, you are the water. And
Yeah.
he described it like that. And he found that, you know, he gets out of that and feels, come on, world, bring it on, right? It was almost like a sense of complete refueling through losing yourself in nature.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I was thinking last night, preparing my mind for this conversation about what we can learn from
Yeah.
nature, about pressure and about being, and about bigger systems and very long time scales, the deep time of nature, which makes most of our worries feel very
Yeah.
inconsequential. And it was reminding me of Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, when she talks about the power of mushrooms. I don't know if you know this. So
Yes. Yes.
the word that she talks about is poo-powie. And it's the energy of a mushroom as it breaks through the
I didn't.
earth and into the environment. And I was thinking about the joyful energy of the natural world that you can, once you feel part of, you can draw on. And there's the kind of cliche of the caterpillar to the butterfly and the imaginal cells, and how they all break down and then reconfigure themselves
Yeah.
for their next life. And I think both of those, that for me, drawing on that energy of nature and the sort of timelessness of nature is great when you're feeling under pressure.
Yeah. And also in those two examples, there's part of that for a mushroom to pop out like that with such joy and, you know,
Yeah.
hello, which is what I got from the way you did
Yes.
it. It's like it's been building up. There's been a sort of hibernation. There's been a sort of
Yeah.
preparation for that. And yet what we're often doing as human beings is carrying on relentlessly. And nature doesn't work like that. There's ebbs
No.
and flows.
Yeah, I really started, and that's a conversation I've really been actively having with the team. Is like, okay, so is November and December when we gather our nuts, and then
Yeah.
January and February when we sit on them, like, and we just chill for a bit and we eat the
Yeah.
nuts that we've gathered, because that sense of you can't keep going at 100% all of the time. And sports people don't do that.
No.
So why do we do that in the work that we do, especially in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah.
And so it's so useful to have natural rhythms, deep time to draw from, to give yourself different mental models, I guess.
Yes. I want to sit with something Claire said there, this idea of losing yourself in your business or your role. That sense that you become what you do. Your identity slides into your role before you know it, and the boundary between you and the work has completely dissolved. For Claire, stepping into nature is what pulls her back. It's the way she separates herself from her role, reconnects to the bigger picture, and remembers that she's more than the organisation she leads, even though she cares about it so deeply. So here's a question for all of us. What can we do to separate ourselves from our role or our work? Because when you really care about what you do, it's hard. It can become all-consuming, almost without you noticing. I love Claire's reference to the mushrooms and how they burst through the ground with this excited, unstoppable energy. Poo-powie! That image is so joyful. And it made me wonder, what's my version of that poo-powie energy? It feels different from simply stepping away. For Claire, it's the natural world. Drawing on the energy of nature helps her reconnect, galvanise, recover, and to remember her why in times of pressure. But I wonder what it is for me. You've heard me talk about this before, but I'm not a great believer in the phrase work-life balance because sometimes it just isn't balanced. There are deadlines, sprints, seasons where your purpose energy is so alive that actually it's the best thing you can do to ride it. But here's what I do witness, especially in purpose-led and non-profit organisations, that everything begins to feel important. People get pulled into too many things, too many responsibilities, too many moments where they feel they have to be the one who steps in. And instead of purpose energy fueling boldness and big thinking, it gets diluted. It becomes constant busyness, relentlessly being on. Purpose energy requires space. Back to that word again. It's felt actually very present in this whole conversation. Purpose energy needs room to breathe, to dream, and to be brave. And that requires discipline. The discipline to stop, to step away, to remember where you actually add the greatest value instead of trying to hold everything. In fact, where do I add the greatest value is a constantly evolving question and worth asking yourself regularly. It's almost like an emergency stop button that can usefully halt us in our tracks. It's also, by the way, a great question to ask your team. Anyway, back to Claire. What would you say, Claire, was the worst pressure you have ever felt?
COVID, for sure. So Watershed has always been held up in creative industries as this amazing mixed model business. So we don't, only about 18% of our income comes from grants, public sector, which in general is, very resilient, very forward thinking, very entrepreneurial until you get to COVID, when like other hospitality businesses, sort of leisure businesses, everything shut down and the amount of public funding to sustain us in that is very small. And that as I think also ongoing uncertainty, like the human brain is not really wired to remain in uncertainty for too long. And I think as a leader, your job is to give some kind of scaffolding in that space to hold it. And that was tough because personally I was having a difficult time at home. My partner was very sick and Watershed was having a hard time, and that was pressure. I took a month off towards the end of COVID for similar reasons, that I was like, I'm not going to be doing anyone any good if I don't take some time.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this the whole sense of human collaboration, which sits at the heart of everything you've spoken about and everything I've read about with you, is like, also, I don't know about you, but I need people. I like people. I like being around people. So when I'm not, I like space too, and I like quiet, and I like everything that you've described. But the idea of not being able to feel people around me and work with people in the human form is very hard for me.
100%. Like when I come into Watershed in the morning and I walk through a bar and there are people preparing for their events and people sitting on their laptops, we like, and you get a sense of energy from it. And as I leave, people are going into the cinema, they're starting their evenings. It's there is a kind of momentum that comes from being around people, especially when you're a public facing venue. And that was really tough. Yes.
You also reminded me of I spoke to the CEO of Alexandra Palace, who again, it's on all the time. Ali Pali, it's on, and it's this buzz of energy going on in different places in this beautiful building, and she was talking about something very similar, just about the energy you get from everything that's going on around, even though you may not be at it or involved in it. It's a breathing organism, isn't it? It's like,
absolutely. And it's and the good thing about that, I don't even have the code to the alarm of Watershed because other people are really much better placed to do that job than I am. And so buildings need teams,
Yeah.
especially if you're open 7 days a week and you're open for the hours that we're open. So one of the things that I'm very lucky about is that I don't feel like it's all on me at all. I have an amazing team and they're really brilliant at their jobs. And that means that we can all sort of work to the best of our abilities, which is great. Of course, if the building fell down, then I would definitely be called in. But
Yes.
but I'm not turning the alarms on and off, which is great.
Yeah. And just before I ask you the last two questions, I'm interested in, you've talked about rest days as a really helpful way of diminishing pressure, releasing people from however they're feeling on experiencing pressure. If you've got a team member or someone who is in that, what I would call dog brain moment, that sort of fight and flight, that they've been caught by extreme pressure in the moment, how do you deal with a team member like that, or a team that is like that in the moment?
It's such a tough question, isn't it? Because there's also a question I think that we all have to ask ourselves is also, where do we draw the line of our
Yeah.
responsibility as businesses? Because you can put all of these things in place, but also people have to be accountable for themselves. You're not their parent or their
You're not
family, or
rescuing.
yeah, you know, so people do have to be given the tools to take accountability for their own ability to deal with pressure. And I think really that's the main thing for us. We do coach, we bring coaching in, we work with an incredible group called Wessel, who often help us with reasonable adjustments. So it can be that neurodiversity might be at play, particularly in that inability to kind of stop and rest, or to be able to sort through a like really overdeveloped sense of responsibility, which delivers many brilliant things to the business, but can also put people into a pickle around that stuff. So bringing people in, trying to get people to reflect on their own accountability and their own ways of working, but also I think setting a good example. I am open about taking a week off, and I already know that's helped somebody else to unpick their like sense of what they can and can't do in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully that, but it's really hard, and keeping appropriate boundaries in that space is constant challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire, so much. Fascinating. I could talk for another half an hour on lots of things that you've mentioned. But if there was someone listening to this podcast saying, I want to be better at managing pressure, what two things, you've said many in this conversation, but what two things would you pass forward to them?
So I definitely think openness. As we enter periods of pressure, it's our sort of natural human instinct to become defensive, to hunker down, to guard your work. And I have never known that to pay off, like being open about what's happening for you, but also being open about, this is the way we do things. How do you do things? So learning and building from other people's work requires a sense of exchange and openness. So just find that tiny crack and sort of prise it open a little bit, and let some light shine in, and it always pays dividends.
Great. And do you have another one?
Well, for those twin pillars of openness and generosity,
Okay.
I think that, but to be clear, being generous involves being generous to yourself as well as to others. So often we don't treat ourselves how we would treat others in an organization, or how we would expect others to be treated. So being kind and generous to yourself, but also, again, giving out into the world in that sense of, we are a linked ecology, and that resource, that energy, that kindness will come back as an organization and a person.
Yes. I love that reframe of like, treat others with generosity, but also treat yourself with generosity, because often we are the worst critique of ourselves.
Absolutely. And we treat ourselves like an endless resource that can just
Yes.
plug everybody else's gaps. And actually, that's not true at all. And is not useful. And it doesn't allow other people to shine. I think I have seen people do their best work when you step out or when you step away and people are allowed to do things. So that generosity, the kindness, always pays off.
Yeah. Lovely, Claire. Thank you so, so much. And I'm honoured that you gave some attention to this podcast at a time when you're about to take a week of recovery.
It did slightly terrify me. This morning I looked at my diary and was like, better under pressure. How do I feel about that? But actually, I am so glad I did, because it's really helped codify some of that thinking before entering this time.
Yes.
So it's good processing work.
Yes, well, absolutely. It's good processing work for the weekend, even just that's approaching. But just on that point, Claire, I think it's so interesting. That's the majority of people at the end of these conversations go, "Oh, okay, I've learned something about myself in this conversation." And I don't think we have these conversations enough, actually. Like it's almost like going meta on yourself, to just take a moment to go, hang on, how do I do that? My coach the other day asked me, what's your system for possibility?
Oh, what a lovely question. I mean, I do think a good question is the greatest gift that you can be given.
Oh, wow.
And we talk about questions as currency. Like, I'm very uninterested in answers. Questions are so useful.
Honestly.
That spaciousness that I talked about with Rebecca Solnit is about finding it and moving into it.
Lovely. So on that note, move into yours, enjoy it deeply, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.